For 8 years, my daughter treated me as if I were dead. No calls, no messages, no acknowledgments of any kind. And then, the morning my name appeared on Forbes, my phone finally lit up. Her text was short, polite, and painfully familiar. A family Christmas party at 6:30 in the evening. She said we needed to talk. That was how the silence ended. Not with an apology, not with warmth, just an invitation. My name is Ilara Whitcomb. I am 62. Being dead while still breathing is not dramatic the way people imagine. It is quieter than that. It is waking up on holidays and realizing no one is waiting for you. It is spending Christmas mornings alone without telling anyone you mind. It is sitting in a hospital room after a minor surgery, staring at the wall, knowing there will be no text asking if you are all right. You stop checking your phone eventually, not because it hurts less, but because hope becomes heavier than disappointment. At first, I told myself she was busy. Then I told myself she needed space. After a while, I understood the truth I had been avoiding. The silence was not accidental. It was chosen. I sent birthday cards for the first 2 years, simple ones, nothing emotional. I stopped when none of them were answered. I left one voicemail during the 3rd year, my voice careful and steady, asking only that she call me back when she had time. She never did. After that, I learned how to be quiet without feeling small. Life did not stop because my daughter erased me. I kept working. I kept paying my bills. I built something of my own with focus and discipline. The kind that comes when you have nowhere else to place your energy. I learned how to sit with grief without letting it spill onto strangers. I learned how to carry dignity without witnesses. What surprised me most was not that she stayed gone. It was how easily the world adjusted to my absence from her life. There was no announcement, no explanation, just a clean, deliberate cut. When her message arrived after 8 years, it did not reopen everything at once. It pressed on a place that had never fully closed. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. I recognized the tone immediately. Practical, controlled. The same tone she used the night everything broke between us. That night came back to me slowly, not as an argument, but as a decision. And as I read her words, I understood that whatever we were about to discuss had started there. The last real conversation we had didn't sound like an ending. It sounded like a negotiation. She stood in my kitchen with her arms crossed, eyes sharp in that way she used when she'd already decided she was right. I remember thinking she looked older than her years and me. Suddenly, much younger. "You don't get it," she said. "This affects me. I do get it." I said, "I just don't agree." Her jaw tightened. "You're choosing yourself over your family." "I'm choosing a life I can live in." I said, "Those aren't the same thing." She shook her head slowly, as if she were disappointed in a stranger. "If you go through with this, I can't be part of it." I waited for her to say more, to soften it, to explain what part of it meant. She didn't. "This isn't a threat," she added. "It's a boundary." That word landed hard. Boundary, clean, reasonable. It left no room for argument, only compliance. "So what are you asking me to do?" I said. "I'm asking you to stop," she replied. "To let it go, to come back to what matters to you," I said quietly. Her voice rose just enough to sting. "I'm your daughter, and I'm still a person," I said. "I didn't stop being one when I became your mother." She stared at me, eyes glossy but unblinking. "If you walk away from this, you're walking away from me." I remember how still the room felt after that. No shouting, no slammed doors, just that sentence hanging between us, heavy and deliberate. "I'm not walking away from you," I said. "I'm refusing to disappear." She picked up her bag and moved toward the door. "I hope it's worth it," she said, without turning back. I watched her leave. I didn't follow. I didn't call after her name. something in me understood that if I did, I'd be agreeing to the terms she'd set. That was the last time we spoke. The silence that followed wasn't confusion. It was enforcement. The first birthday after she stopped speaking to me, I waited until noon before I admitted the phone wasn't going to ring. By evening, I laughed at myself for having waited at all. The second year, I didn't wait. I went to work, bought myself a small cake on the way home, and ate it standing over the sink. By the third year, the day passed like any other. Friends tried. At first, maybe she just needs time, one of them said over coffee, her voice gentle in a way that suggested she didn't believe it either. I've given her time, I said. She knows where I am, another asked, more carefully. Have you heard anything at all? No, I said, and I think that's the point. I stopped reaching out somewhere around the fourth year, not because I was angry. Anger takes energy. I was tired. Tired of choosing my words so carefully, they no longer sounded like mine. Tired of sending messages that vanished into silence. One afternoon, I typed her name into my phone, stared at it for a full minute, then set the device face down and went back to work. I never sent the message. There were moments that caught me off guard. Sitting in a waiting room after a minor surgery, a nurse glanced at my chart and asked, "Anyone we should call for you know?" I said, too quickly, then softer. There isn't. At holidays. Coworkers filled the air with stories about travel and family arguments and loud dinners. Someone once asked, "Are you seeing your daughter this year?" I smiled and said, "She has her own plans." It wasn't a lie. It was just incomplete. Love didn't disappear during those years. It changed shape. It became something I carried instead of shared. I learned how to fold it away when it threatened to surface in the middle of a meeting or while standing in line at the grocery store. I learned how to speak about her in the past tense without sounding bitter. Hope faded quietly. Not all at once. It slipped away in small, unremarkable moments, like the habit of checking my phone before bed or setting an extra place at the table without realizing why. Eventually, even those stopped. By the time her name came back into my life, I had learned how to live without being claimed by anyone at all. Work became the place where I didn't have to explain myself. Titles changed quietly. Responsibilities expanded. I stopped telling people I was trying and started saying I was busy. It felt more honest. During one performance review, my manager leaned back in his chair and said, "You've taken on more than anyone else on this team." "I know," I said. "I asked for it." He raised an eyebrow. "Most people wait to be offered. I don't." I said, "I'd rather be told no." He nodded. "The way people do when they realize something about you they can't quite name. You don't seem afraid of working alone." "I'm not." I said, "I'm practiced." There were promotions, eventually, not dramatic ones, just steady steps forward. New projects, broader authority, a sense of competence that didn't need to be witnessed to be real. When colleagues celebrated with dinners and toasts, I went home early and slept well. I learned how to let satisfaction be quiet. A younger coworker once asked, "How do you stay so focused? You never seem distracted." I considered the question longer than she expected. I learned how to keep going without an audience. I said. She laughed, thinking it was a joke. I didn't correct her. Money stopped being a source of anxiety somewhere along the way. Bills were paid without calculation. Savings grew. I bought myself a better apartment because it made my life easier, not because I wanted anyone to see it. Independence stopped feeling like a consolation prize and started feeling like a foundation. At a conference, a speaker talked about balance and said, "You can't have everything." I wrote in the margin of my notebook, "I can have what I choose," and underlined it once. There were evenings when the quiet felt heavy, but it no longer felt accusing. I filled it with work, with reading, with the kind of routines that keep you steady. I didn't tell myself I was whole. I told myself I was capable. That felt closer to the truth. By the time my name began circulating beyond the rooms I worked in, I wasn't building to prove anything. I was building because it was the only place I still felt entirely like myself. The email came in while I was reviewing notes for a meeting. The subject line was polite, almost cautious, as if it didn't want to overstep. When I opened it and saw my name, I read it twice before it settled. My assistant knocked lightly and stepped into my office. "Have you seen this yet?" she asked, holding up her phone. "I have," I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. She smiled wide. "This is big, really big." "It is," I said. I meant it. In the factual sense, by mid-morning, messages started coming in. Colleagues stopped by my door. One said, "You're famous now." Another laughed and added, "Don't forget us, little people." At lunch, a partner leaned across the table and said, "You should call your family. This is one of those moments. I don't have anyone to call." I said. The sentence landed heavier than I expected. He cleared his throat. "Well, then you call us." I smiled and lifted my glass. It was kind of him to offer, and it wasn't the same. When the article went live, I clicked the link alone at my desk. There I was, reduced to a clean photograph and a summary of choices that had taken years to make. The piece talked about growth and discipline and resilience. It didn't mention what had been lost along the way. I felt pride, but it was contained, like something wrapped carefully so it wouldn't spill. There was no one to forward the link to with a note that said, "Can you believe this?" No one who would read it with the context of who I had been before. That afternoon, my phone stayed silent except for work. I finished my meetings. I answered questions. I went home at a reasonable hour. The recognition didn't fix anything. It didn't close the distance or soften the quiet. It only made the absence more precise. The text came in just after sunset. When the day had already settled into something manageable, I recognized the number before I read the message. Some things stay memorized even when you try to let them go. Family Christmas party at 6:30. We need to talk. No greeting. No explanation. Not even my name. I read it once. Then again. The phrasing was careful, stripped of anything that could be misread as feeling. It was the same tone she used when she wanted something addressed without opening space for emotion. I called my assistant to confirm the next day's schedule. "Cancel my evening meetings on Friday," I said. "Everything?" she asked. "I thought you wanted to keep things light after the article." "I do," I said. "Just not that night." She hesitated. "Is this about family?" "Yes," I said. It was the first time I'd used the word out loud in years. After I hung up, I stared at the screen again. 8 years of silence. Broken by logistics, I felt the old instinct rise. The one that wanted to fill in the gaps for her. To assume this meant something more. I pushed it down. I typed a response. Deleted it. Typed another. I settled on the shortest option. "I'll be there." The confirmation appeared almost immediately. No follow-up, no softening. The exchange felt complete to her. That night, I packed without ceremony. I chose clothes that made me feel like myself, not like someone trying to prove anything. I left gifts at home. I wasn't arriving as a guest. A colleague texted to congratulate me again. I thanked him and set the phone aside. My focus had narrowed to something smaller and heavier. I didn't tell myself this was reconciliation. I didn't tell myself it was closure. I told myself it was information. Whatever she wanted to discuss had a context, and I was finally being invited into it. As I turned off the lights, I felt the familiar ache settle in my chest. Not hope, not fear, something steadier. The knowledge that whatever waited on the other side of that door would ask me to choose again. The house looked the same from the outside. That was the first thing I noticed. Same paint, same lights. as if time had paused out of courtesy. I stood at the door long enough for my presence to register before I knocked. She opened it almost immediately. My daughter's smile appeared on cue, practiced and contained. "You made it," she said. "I said I would," I replied. She stepped aside to let me in, her hand hovering near my arm before dropping back to her side. The gesture felt calculated, like she was checking what I would allow. The living room was filled with voices. A few relatives I hadn't seen in years looked up, surprise flickering across their faces before settling into politeness. Someone said my name like it was a test. "It's good to see you," an aunt said, leaning in for a brief hug. "It's been a long time," I said. My daughter stayed a step behind me as I moved through the room. She didn't introduce me. She didn't need to. Everyone knew who I was. What I was watching for was who I was to her. "Can I get you a drink?" she asked. "No, thank you," I said. "I'm fine." She nodded and turned away, already disengaging. The distance was familiar, controlled. She was present without being close. We ended up in the kitchen, standing across from each other with the counter between us. She kept her hands busy, straightening things that didn't need it. "You look well," she said. "Finally, so do you," I said. She glanced up, searching my face for something. Approval, maybe, or compliance. I didn't give her either. "I'm glad you came," she added, her voice lower now. "I wanted to hear what you had to say," I said. A flicker of tension crossed her expression. "It's not something we should talk about here." I waited. Silence has never bothered me. "We'll sit down after dinner," she said. "When it's quieter." "All right," I said. As she walked away, I realized how carefully she had arranged the evening. Who was here? Where we would sit? How long she could delay the conversation. The house hadn't changed, but the rules had, and this time, she was the one managing the space. I stayed where I was, letting the noise wash around me. I hadn't come back to reclaim a place. I had come to see how much of one she was willing to offer. She waited until the plates were cleared and the room thinned out. When the last conversation drifted toward the living room, she touched my elbow. "Can we talk now?" she said. I nodded. She led me into the study and closed the door behind us. She didn't sit. Neither did I. "I'll be direct," she said. "Things are complicated." "They usually are when people say that," I replied. Her mouth tightened. "I don't want this to feel transactional." "Then don't make it one," I said. She exhaled and looked at the floor. "You know about the article? About your company?" "I do," I said. "And you know what that kind of visibility brings?" She added. "Opportunities. Access." "Go on," I said. She lifted her head. "There's a situation, a shortfall. It's temporary." "For whom?" I asked. "For us," she said, then corrected herself. "For the family." I let the silence hold. She filled it. "We need help," she said, "and you're in a position to provide it." There it was. Clean. Finally honest. "You disappeared for 8 years," I said, "and this is what brings you back." "That's not fair," she said quickly. "I invited you because I wanted to reconnect." "You invited me because you needed something." I said, "Those aren't the same." Her voice sharpened. "You're acting like I planned this. You timed it." I said, "You waited until it was public." She looked away. "I didn't know how else to do it." "You could have called." I said, "Any day, any year." She swallowed. "I didn't think you'd answer." "I always answered." I said, "You're the one who stopped." Her shoulders slumped. For a moment, she looked younger. "I didn't think it would last this long," she said. "I thought you'd come back. That you'd choose us." "I chose myself." I said, "That was the problem." She crossed her arms again, the old posture returning. "So you're saying you won't help?" "I'm saying you don't get to erase me and then ask me to rescue you," I said. Her eyes filled, but her voice stayed firm. You're punishing me. No, I said. I'm refusing to pretend this is reconciliation. She laughed once. Brittle. You always make it sound so simple. It is. I said. You want the benefits without the relationship. She looked at me. Anger and shame fighting for space. You're still my mother, and you're still my daughter. I said. That doesn't turn need into love. She opened her mouth, then closed it. The room felt smaller, not because of the walls, but because the truth had finally taken up all the space. She talked for a long time. I let her. She explained timelines and pressures, names I barely knew, decisions made without me. Each sentence carried a reason, a justification, a way this wasn't really her fault. I listened without interrupting. My hands folded, my attention steady. We just need a bridge, she said. Something to get us through. I nodded once, to show I was hearing her. You've always been good at fixing things, she added. Softer now. This could help us start over. I didn't react. Silence has a way of making people reveal more than they intend. She leaned forward. I'm not asking you to choose sides. You already did, I said. Her eyes lifted. What do you mean you chose when you decided 8 years of silence was acceptable? I said. You chose when you waited until my success was public. Her jaw tightened. So that's it. You're going to hold that against me forever. I'm not holding anything. I said, I'm setting it down. She stood, pacing once, then stopping in front of me. You could make this easier. I know, I said. I won't. The room went quiet, not awkward, final. So you're saying no? She said. I'm saying I won't trade money for proximity. I said. I won't confuse help with healing. She pressed her lips together, fighting something that looked like anger and fear at the same time. You're abandoning us. I'm choosing myself. I said. The same thing you asked me to give up. She shook her head. You've changed. I had to. I said. You left. She looked at me then, really looked, as if measuring what was left to negotiate. Whatever she saw made her step back. All right, she said. The word sounded thin. I stood and picked up my coat. I didn't come here to punish you, I said. I came to be honest. She didn't follow me to the door. I didn't wait. What I refused to give wasn't money. It was the version of myself that believed love required erasure. We didn't speak again after that night. Not in the way people mean when they say we talked it through. There were no long emails, no follow-up calls. Just a short message a few weeks later. I understand your position. She wrote, I hope you're well. I am, I replied. And this time, it wasn't something I said to keep the peace. It was simply true. Our relationship didn't heal, but it stopped pretending. There is honesty now in the distance, and I find I can live with that. I still think of her on birthdays. I still notice things she would have liked. Love didn't disappear when I said no. It just stopped costing me my dignity. A friend asked once, carefully, do you regret it? No, I said. I regret how long it took me to learn that love isn't proven by sacrifice alone. That was the lesson that stayed. You can care deeply and still refuse to be used. You can leave a door unlocked without standing in the doorway forever. Peace isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with apologies or grand reunions. It settles in when you stop arguing with who you are. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like it. Share where you're watching from in the comments, or subscribe for the next chapter. Some stories don't end with reconciliation. They end with clarity. And sometimes, that's enough.